Um, right, well, I thought we'd look at a favourite topic of mine. I don't actually enjoy talking about this, but it's always necessary because it always is right there at the thought. And I kind of made a vow in about last February or March that I wasn't going to write stuff just about Bishop Williamson and keep talking, because I'm so sick of this. But every time you try and do that, he comes out with another liaison comments with even more crazy stuff in it, and unfortunately it does have an effect on people, and it does, you're not allowed to just be silent about it, and it does, every time that the truth is put into question or even just confused, you kind of have to say, okay, this isn't right, and here's what's wrong about it. So what's he doing and where's he going with it? I'm not going to deal with the question of why. That's what everybody seems to want to know. I don't know why, and really it doesn't really matter why he's doing this and saying this. You don't need to know why somebody is doing something bad in order to know that they are doing something bad. If a man runs in and starts shooting, you're not going to say, but why are you doing this to me? You deal with that later. It's all to do with the new mass, and it's so amazing that in a way you can't believe it. And I think this is kind of what has taken a few people off guard. It's so incredible that this just can't be happening, because this is Bishop Williamson and it's the new mass. But it is happening, and he's what he's essentially teaching is, well, what he's doing is he's making the new mass acceptable within tradition. That's it, and that is clearly the goal. Just by looking at his own words. And the starting point of that is the miracles, the quote-unquote miracles, the Novus Ordo miracles, the bogus miracles of the bogus Mass. So there are three Eleison comments which he brought out in quick succession, which has everybody got a copy of it? It's going to pass that back. Novus Ordo Missae 1, 2 and 3, which I'm sure you've read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, all three of them, because I value my sanity too highly, and I don't have the patience. But I want to look back at them and then look at these miracles themselves, because it is clear what his thinking is. If you read those three Eleison comments in a row and compare what he says and just look at where he starts and where he ends up and look at the direction he's going in, it's a little bit alarming. The Novus Ordo miracles themselves, I'm convinced, are 100% fake. They're completely fraudulent. They're not miracles at all. They're not even prodigies, I think. They're a hoax. Well, we can come to that in a little bit, and if some of you haven't read it in here, there's a very long article about why the Novus Ordo miracles are completely fake. In there, yeah. I can go through it a little bit in a moment. I think just to give us an idea of what Bishop Williamson's thinking is, let's just look at the very bad rhyming couplet at the start of each of these. So each Eleison comments starts with some really awful poetry, which is supposed to kind of sum up what this Eleison comments is about. It's the whole thing summarised in 2 lines. Number 1. God has worked miracles in the Novus Ordo Mass. That's what the evidence suggests.
Who's that?
Alas. That's Novus Ordo Missae 1, yes? Now, if you look at it, what does that mean? First of all, well, it ends with a question mark. God has worked miracles in the Novus Ordo Mass. Now that either means has he or hasn't he, I'm not sure. Or it means I'm surprised to learn I didn't think it was true, but apparently he has. Well, who would have thought it possible? Is that true? Has he really? Well, yes. The answer is that's what the evidence suggests. That's the answer. And then, alas, is that really such a bad thing though? Okay? So 3 things in one go there. First of all, has he worked miracles? Are these miracles genuine? Secondly, yes, they are genuine. They really are, because that's what the evidence suggests. Third thing, alas, question mark, is it really a bad thing? Now that we've established that these miracles are genuine, what might that mean? Is it a bad thing or is it a good thing? Well, just hold off your judgment there, because I'm going to show you that it might not be such a bad thing after all. All of that is kind of contained in germ, in kernel, in that little rhyming couple. That's the first one. That's where he starts. Novus Ordo Missae 2. The Eucharistic miracles are where God shows that He Himself is truly there. So what does that mean? First of all, notice we're assuming that these really are Novus Ordo miracles. Now there's no question about it. It's just stated as a fact. But what does it mean? It means that it really is God. Real miracle means really is God. Okay? God is showing, is teaching us something through these miracles. He's showing us. Novus Ordo Missae 3. Catholics, be generous. Recognise God's goal to save outside quote-unquote tradition many a soul. Now, apart from the fact that tradition is inside quotation, I'm a big stickler. It might come across as pedantic, but the punctuation matters. Why does he want to put quotation marks around the word tradition? Why not just say to save outside tradition? Why is it to save outside quote-unquote tradition? As if to suggest there's no such thing really as tradition. Everybody's traditional. Or not traditional. So, and it's elsewhere, if you look at what Bishop Williamson says in various sermons and conferences and so on, it's pretty clear, to me at least, who have been following him, that when he talks about the resistance and when he talks about tradition, he means Catholics of the SSPX, of the Resistance, Indult Mass, Sedevacantists, Novus Ordo, and people who are not sure they even believe in God, anything. And he even has said himself that he doesn't really believe in the Resistance, but he includes and he works with and he sympathises with all these people. And so that explains that. So that's what he means by tradition in quotation marks, perhaps. Catholics, be generous, recognise God's goal to save outside tradition many a soul. Now his contention there is God wants to save people outside of so-called tradition. He wants to save their souls. Well, I don't have a problem with that. I'm sure God does want to. Well, we know for a fact God wants to save every single soul, not just many. But what's implied by that is not only that God wants to save them, but that He is going to save them, and that He is going to use, how can I put it, actively use that situation that they're in. And he's got one eye on the Novus Ordo, when he says outside of tradition in the context of a title which is Novus Ordo Missae 3, right? So where is outside of tradition? People who are going to the new Mass. And they're not just going to be saved in spite of the fact that they're going to the new Mass. It's the new Mass that is going to save them. And if you don't recognise that, that's wrong. And you are wrong. Why are you wrong? You're not being generous. Be generous. Be generous towards the Novus Ordo Mass. Recognise that it saves people's souls. Okay, that's the conclusion. That's where he ends up by the end of the third Eleison Comments. So it starts with, starting point, there are what looks like miracles. Are they real? Yes, they are. Conclusion at the end of 3 Eleison Comments, Novus Ordo Mass saves souls. I don't think I'm misreading that. There are some people who want to defend Bishop Williamson, and I would tactfully suggest that a lot of the priests seeking to defend Bishop Williamson are doing so for, shall we say, less than worthy motives, and because of various interests involved, not least issues surrounding episcopal orders, for whatever reason, want it, or even if it's just for their own peace of mind, seeking to defend Bishop Williamson, have said, look, he's not saying that the new Mass is good, he's just saying that it might be valid, and who knows, maybe these miracles are real. But if so, there are miracles in the new Mass, so what? All it proves is that it can be really valid. Okay, if it's really valid, then that really is Christ in the host. The transubstantiation really takes place. That really is the Blessed Sacrament. That's all that it proves. We don't need to go any further than that. You can accept the miracles, and that's all that it means. And you're trying to twist Bishop Williamson's words. I don't really think we are, and I think it's pretty clear that Bishop Williamson himself goes way beyond simply saying the new Mass can be valid. Otherwise, why do we have all this talk about be generous and recognise that God saves souls outside of tradition, which is in an Eleison comment called Novus Ordo Missae. Right, I go back to the start of Novus Ordo Missae 1, just to really prove this. What is the first thing he says? It's a quote, but why do you quote somebody? You quote a quote from a President of the United States, so presumably not even a Catholic and probably a Freemason. Certainly not somebody who anybody here would recognise as an authority on matters Catholic. Why does one quote another person? Either to prove something about that person, and we're not discussing John Adams, so the only other reason is because John Adams puts it so well, he says what I want to say. Facts are stubborn things. The fact that it's in quotation marks is irrelevant. John Adams said this, but effectively it's Bishop Williamson saying it. He just doesn't want to say it himself, so he's letting John Adams talk for him. Facts are stubborn things. And whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. So you might not want this to be true, but... Sorry? Oh, sorry, yeah. You might not want that to be true, but it's a fact, you can't deny it. Okay? You can't deny something if it's a fact. And notice right from the start, he's got 3 Eleison comments here. He wrote 3 in a row. He could have written 5 or 10 or 20 if he wanted to. Novus Ordo Missae 20. He could have spent as much time or as little time on this issue as he wanted to. He chose to spend 3 weeks, 3 Eleison comments, each of which fits on a normal one side of a sheet of paper. And he starts off assuming that these miracles are a fact and saying you are going to have a hard time because you are up against a fact, and facts are stubborn, and it doesn't matter whatever your wishes or inclinations are, it's you versus a fact. Those are the very first words he says. And then he goes on into a narrative about how the host was dropped on the floor and they put it in water, and Dr. Castagnon took the sample away to San Francisco, and then they got another chap involved and another one, somebody from Australia and somebody from I don't know where, Italy also, and Dr. Jugibe, is that how it's pronounced, from New York, and he said it's a heart muscle and there are white blood cells, etc., etc. Okay. And all I will say about that is notice that there's a very definite, there's a kind of a narrative style. He's telling it like a story. Looking down his microscope, Dr. Jugibe is quoted as having said, "I can tell you exactly what it is. It's part of the muscle found in the wall." Why do you need to tell it in that style? Looking down his microscope, he said. It's like it's going on in front of, it's like you're witnessing it, it's happening in front of your very eyes. This is the way you would write a novel. Okay? You're telling a story, you're bringing it alive to the reader. It's not what you should be doing. It's playing mind games with the reader there, because then at the end of that, you feel like you've really witnessed it for yourself, so it must be true. I'll come back to the question of Dr. Castagnon and Dr. Jugibe in a moment. Novus Ordo Missae 2, he moves on to say, well, he starts with the same thing, facts are stubborn. Again, there's no question that it is a fact, and facts are stubborn. And he says, if you doubt the Buenos Aires miracle, there are lots of other ones on the internet, look them up. One of them must be true, which is, I mean, it's nonsense. If one miracle is fake, then they might as well all be fake. And if we know that the Novus Ordo Concilia bishops are capable of faking a miracle, then that means you can't trust any of them. And if the whole process of approving of a miracle in the church before the council was so rigorous, it's for that very reason. You can't let one fake miracle through, because otherwise it risks discrediting all of them, or even the good ones. So it's no good simply saying, look up Sokolka, look up these other ones in Poland and elsewhere. The other thing is, if one does take the trouble to look them up, the curious thing you'll find is that they're all exactly the same. It's exactly the same miracle happening again and again and again and again, which is very bizarre. I don't think, and the fathers can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any precedent for that in the history of the church. Exactly the same miracle. Never done before, and then suddenly in the 1990s it starts happening, and then it happens about 20 or 50 different times in different countries all of a sudden. That's not normal. And to my mind, that looks like a very good PR stunt. It looks like they found a convincing formula and now they're milking it for all it's worth, is how that looks to me. Anyway, Novus Ordo Missae 2, then. But how is it possible? So we've established that it's a fact, and now we're asking ourselves, how is this possible? And briefly, how can I summarise what he says here? Essentially, his answer to that is, well, God sort of wanted to give people, after Vatican II, something that was second best. So some people had the faith and they ended up with the traditional Mass, and the traditional Mass is just brilliant, that's great. And then some people, well, God sort of wanted to punish them, but not really punish them. He sort of rewarded them, but didn't reward them with the traditional Mass, but he did reward them with the new Mass, which isn't as good as the traditional Mass, but it's as good, it's second best. So the Novus Ordo Mass is not quite as good as the traditional Mass, or maybe not anywhere near as good, but it's still something. And again, it's the same thing has been reportedly said by SSPX priests. The Novus Ordo Mass only gives you a trickle of grace. The traditional Mass is like a waterfall, and the Novus Ordo Mass is like a little stream of grace. The problem with that is well, I mean, it should be obvious. If it's not as good, what does that mean? It means on Sunday, if there's a traditional Mass near you, you go to it, and if there isn't, what do? Well, at least you get some grace from the Novus Ordo, so all we've got is a Novus Ordo to go to, we might as well go to the Novus Ordo. And we know, or we should know, that is, it's not just an understatement, it's just plain wrong. It isn't true. It isn't true. If you go to the Novus Ordo Mass, you'll lose the faith eventually, and you'll lose the faith without realising it, because it's modernist, and it expresses, not only does it not express the Catholic faith, it expresses something which is completely different and at odds with the Catholic faith. And I'm sure you only have to look to your own experience of friends and relatives who've been going to the Novus Ordo Mass for a long time, or for a while, and they end up becoming modernist, they end up liberal, and they don't even realise it in many cases. It's drip, 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 and then they've lost the faith 10 years later, 20 years later, they're no longer Catholic. This is very, very, very dangerous indeed. After Vatican II, some priests and laity had the grace to see immediately what a betrayal it was. And the traditional movement was soon underway. To the other sheep, God gave the grace to see it later. But can we not all admit that there are many good Catholics who trusted their bishops as good Catholics normally should do, and did not these bishops insist on the lie? The Novus Ordo was no different from the true Mass. What specified Vatican II in the Novus Ordo Mass was precisely the officialisation of the modernist heresy within the Church. So does it not make sense? Does it not make sense that in punishment of their modern worldliness, these sheep would broadly lose the true rite of Mass, while in reward of their desire for Mass, they should not lose every valid Mass? So that in a reward for not having totally lost the faith, God gives them the Novus Ordo Mass as a reward. It's the booby prize right? It's the wooden spoon, but it's a reward. It's not as good. It's it's not as good as the silver trophy. It's the wooden spoon. It's a really second-class reward, but it is a reward. So God gave these Catholics the Novus Ordo Mass as a reward. But again, what are the consequences of that? It means it's a good thing in itself, and God uses it, and God approves it, and God gives it to people. Novus Ordo Missae 3.
What about the argument there that you could say there that the lie, that it's bad? It seems as though he says there that it's bad, even though he says it's a reward also. How do you deal with that?
He says it's bad. He does at one point. That's true. Thank you for.
It's in that you just quoted it. It's half bad, half good kind of thing. He says that he says the word lie. He says that.
And did not these bishops insist on the lie that the Novus Ordo Mass is the
Right.
true Mass?
That
Yes.
very quote that you gave there.
Yes. Well, so he's admitting there that the Novus Ordo Mass is different from the true Mass, which is fine. You can say it's not as good as the true Mass, and that means it's different. So the Novus Ordo bishops, the problem with the Novus Ordo bishops, according to this, the problem with the Novus Ordo bishops is they say the Novus Ordo Mass is as good as the traditional Mass, whereas in reality it's not quite as good. But he does elsewhere in that. He says that Vatican II is a religion of man, and the Novus Ordo
Right,
Mass
I
is...
see. The lie could be not that it's evil, but that it's as good.
Yeah,
The truth is, it's
Yeah.
less good. It's a lie to say that it's as good.
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So you have a couple of possible interpretations of what the lie is.
He also says in the same one, I mean, I'm skipping over an awful lot here because I just want to get a feel from where he starts, where he goes with it, and where he ends up. This is from the same one, Novus Ordo Missae 2. Doctrinally, the Novus Ordo Mass is ambiguous, poised between the religion of God and the conciliar religion of man. Now, in matters of faith, ambiguity is deadly, being normally designed to undermine the faith, as the Novus Ordo Mass frequently does. If it's normally designed, that means it's not always designed to do it. And if it frequently does, the Novus Ordo Mass frequently undermines the faith. Doesn't mean that means that it doesn't always undermine the faith. Sometimes, perhaps if you have a priest who says the Novus Ordo all in Latin, well then maybe it won't undermine the faith. Or maybe if he adheres strictly to the new missal and doesn't add in his own little bits, then maybe it won't undermine the faith. And also notice that it's ambiguous. The problem with the Novus Ordo Mass is not that it is ambiguous. Right? It's not. Well, I mean, it has obviously bits in it that are ambiguous, but it's not. The Protestants of Alsace-Lorraine, in the very west of France, said in 1970, "This is great. We can use this new missal for our Protestant service, and that's wonderful. We can now be ecumenical, and the Catholics can attend our Lord's Supper, and we can." They said that that was acceptable to them. So is it really ambiguous? If it is acceptable to the Protestants, and I mean, my purpose here is not to give you a full breakdown of the Novus Ordo Mass and what's wrong with it, but there's a problem in saying that. And he also says, like Vatican II, and again, Vatican II has ambiguous bits, but it also has bits which are just a plain wrong and not even ambiguous. Right, Novus Ordo Missae 3. He then moves on. Finally, he's what do we have here? Catholics must conform their minds to the mind of God. So now that we've established that the Novus Ordo miracles are real, now that we have established that the Novus Ordo Mass can be a good thing, can be a reward, albeit not as good as the traditional Mass, all that's left now is you need to conform your mind to that. I've shown you that there are miracles. I've explained how that can be. The answer is that God has given it as a second-class reward. Now you have to conform your mind to that. All Catholics, and Catholics cleaving to tradition have a special need to work out what God meant by the miracles. And we've already been told that, but he's going to go on and say it a second time in case we didn't get it. Humanly speaking, the wonder may not be that there have been miracles at all within the Novus Ordo, but that there have not been more. The lesson most obvious is that not all Novus Ordo masses are invalid, etc., etc. And why is this? The Novus Ordo Mass may have been allowed by God to make it easier for Catholics to leave the faith if they wanted to, but not impossible to keep it if they wanted to. So the Novus Ordo Mass, if you go to the Novus Ordo, says Bishop Williamson, it is now, if you go to the Novus Ordo, it is now easier for you to leave the faith if you want to. If you wake up one day and say to yourself, I'm so sick of being a Catholic, I don't want to be a Catholic anymore, then your conscience will be less troubled if you're going to the Novus Ordo Mass than it would be if you were going to the traditional Mass. You will find the Novus Ordo Mass less of an obstacle for you apostatizing than the traditional Mass would be. Not that it actually causes people to lose the faith. And also, he also talks about Catholics who have to some extent or other stood back from the Novus Ordo framework. I think I've mentioned this before. He's not talking about the Conciliar Church. He's saying the Novus Ordo framework, and we have more or less to some extent stood back from the framework. Remember Archbishop Lefebvre, quoted by Father Hugo earlier on, it's your duty to separate yourself from... the quote from Archbishop Lefebvre says priests. It's the duty of every priest, but I think it's pretty clear it's the duty of every faithful as well. If you want to save your soul, you can't be part of the Conciliar Church. The Conciliar Church is a new religion, or why would it call itself the Conciliar Church? And what Archbishop Lefebvre was very keen to point out, I did not coin the phrase Conciliar Church. They are the ones who called themselves the Conciliar Church. From the 1970s onwards, they were saying, we are the Church of the Council. They called themselves the Church of the Council. Very well, fine, but we don't want to be part of that church. Now, it's true, we can't be part of that church either. And by the way, in case, lest there be any doubt about that, and amazing though it is, it seems that not only Bishop Fellay, but also now Bishop Williamson doesn't recognise that there is such a thing as the Conciliar Church. He no longer talks about it. He always scrupulously avoids using the phrase whenever it would be appropriate for him to do so. In case anybody is tempted to doubt that there is such a thing as the Conciliar Church, can I suggest that you try reading some of the encyclicals of John Paul II? In the days before I was a traditionalist, when I was a Novus, but probably like a lot of you, I was kind of, I went through the whole spectrum. When I was a Novus Ordo Catholic, I was kind of a conservative Novus Ordo Catholic. Then I was a very angry conservative Novus Ordo Catholic. Then I was a kind of indult mass once in a while whenever I can, and then indult mass and then SSPX and so on. I remember reading, for example, what was the one about abortion in 1995? Evangelium Vitae. It's typical JP2 encyclical. It's got kind of good bits where it's kind of right answer, wrong reason, and then he puts a bad bit and mixes it all in together, and it's just terrible, you can't use it. So he condemns abortion, he condemns euthanasia, and then he condemns the death penalty. Well, how can you put the death penalty on a par with abortion? Lawful execution of a guilty man, completely wicked, selfish killing of the only person on the earth who's never done any harm to anyone and is completely innocent for selfish motives. And you're drawing a parallel. And even when he condemns abortion, JP2, he always does so on the grounds of completely Freemasonic enlightenment. He'll say it's because, human rights and right to life and so on and so on. So it's kind of right answer, wrong reason. Anyway, my point about that is that any of those encyclicals by JP2, Benedict XVI, look at the footnotes and look at the references and look at what they're drawing on for their teaching, and it is 99% of it is kind of 1963, 64, 65 onwards. Vatican II is the oldest. Very occasionally, JP2 will cite, Pius XII, Humani Generis from the 1940s, 50s. Very, very occasionally he will, and it will be some completely harmless quote from there. And it's almost like he's doing it just to prove, look, I can quote something from before the council. So he'll have 100 footnotes, references, and one of them will be from before the council. And all the others, you read, just look at the footnotes. Don't take my word for it, see for yourself. It's like the church began in 1962, and there were no other councils before. Vatican II onwards. And then, of course, by the time we arrive now with Pope Francis, he's got 50 years of things to draw on now. And Benedict XVI can quote JP2, who himself can quote Paul VI, who himself can quote Vatican II. So it looks like, you've got lots of sources to draw on, but you look at this and you think, well, what went on before Vatican II? Where was the church not teaching anything before 1962? So they really are the conciliar church. They coined the phrase, they refer to themselves that way. Anyway, that Novus Ordo Missae 3 then. So I'm just looking at the bit at the bottom now, the last couple of sentences. There are true sacraments. Sorry, I go back a little bit. Therefore, the Novus Ordo Mass and the Novus Ordo Church as a whole are dangerous for the faith, and Catholics are right to have clung to tradition to avoid danger. But, now when somebody says yes, but, what does that mean? It means no, right? Yes, but means no. When a politician says, that's true, but, it means that's not true, okay? Catholics are right to have clung to tradition, but as they have had to put a distance between themselves and the mainstream church, notice not the Novus Ordo Church, not the Conciliar Church, the mainstream church, they've put a distance between themselves and the mainstream church, so they have exposed themselves to the opposite danger of an isolation leading to a sectarian and even pharisaical spirit disconnected from reality. So there is a danger, says Bishop Williamson. And notice that we are talking about the Novus Ordo Mass, and he is warning us of a danger. And the danger is not going to the Novus Ordo Mass is dangerous. The danger is by distancing yourself from the mainstream church. And how do you do that? You do that by not going to the Novus Ordo Mass. So by not going to the Novus Ordo Mass, you risk a pharisaical spirit, disconnected from reality. So he's not saying Catholics are right because the Novus Ordo, traditional Catholics are right because the Novus Ordo is dangerous. He's saying Catholics are right, but because they do that, which means they're not right, they are risking a danger, a pharisaical spirit disconnected from reality. Sectarian and a sectarian spirit. So if you don't accept that the Novus Ordo Mass can do good, if you don't accept that the Novus Ordo Mass is a source of grace for people going to it, then you are a pharisaical sectarian and you are disconnected from reality. Has he actually said that? No. But he's insinuated it, and anybody who reads that and takes it seriously will say to themselves, oh, I hope I'm not one of those terrible Pharisees who are disconnected. How can I avoid falling into that? I'd better start attending the Novus Ordo once, or at least not condemning people who... Do you see where this leads? And then what's the next thing? Your sister or your auntie or your next door neighbour who's going to the Novus Ordo and who thinks they're a really good Catholic and has started talking to you because they see that you're kind of serious about being a Catholic, or your work colleague or whatever who visits you one day and sees that you've got a million statues in your house and it's like a church in here. Wow, this guy's really takes his religion seriously. What are you going to say to them? How are you going to be equipped to really make the case to that person? I understand that you think you're doing the right thing, but you need to really understand this as a matter of urgency. You've got to stop going to the Novus Ordo Mass, and you have to start going to the traditional mass. It's not your fault. You've been conned. You've been lied to. You've been sold a fake. Your birthright has been exchanged for a mess of pottage. You didn't realise it, but this Novus Ordo Mass is not normal, and a lot of Novus Ordo Catholics don't realise that, and they think that the Novus Ordo Mass, that is Mass for them, right? They don't even know that there is such a thing as the traditional Mass, and they presumably assume in their mind, if they even give it a second thought, that Mass was always in English with guitars and whatever. That it will come as news to them that that wasn't in fact the case, that for 1,969 years, 70 years, it was very, very different. You're not going to really be equipped to do that after this, are you? Because how can you? They might be getting grace from it, and there is on the other hand, there's the danger of a Pharisaical sectarian spirit. So that's where this leads to. First of all, are there miracles? Yes, there are. Are they real? Yes, they are. Secondly, how can that be? Well, it's because it's a second-class reward, and what are the consequences of that? God wants to save souls, so he's channeling his grace through the Novus Ordo Mass, and you have to be generous and accept it. And if you don't, you're a Pharisee. So, it's pretty clear to my mind that the minute that if you accept the Novus Ordo miracles, that is where it will lead you to. It will lead you to accepting the Novus Ordo Mass. Now the argument is, and it's a kind of rhetorical debating point, for the sake of winning an argument, people can say, but it need not lead you to that. Well, maybe not, but in fact, in reality, in practice, it does. And the fact that it's led Bishop Williamson to that conclusion should tell us all we need to know. Now, as for the actual miracles themselves, then, our natural instinct should tell us there is something funny going on here with these miracles. There's something not right about it. And for those of you who haven't read this yet, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to just take you through a few general points. The article is laid out, it's pages 26 to 30-something odd. It's laid out point by point. I could have put this in any old order. It doesn't really matter. And it's not comprehensive. I may have missed a few things out. You could just write reams about it, but I tried to stick to the essential. Number one, lack of witnesses. The first problem that occurs to my mind about these Novus Ordo miracles is that nobody witnessed them. Why is that a problem? Because miracles, as we know, are a motive of credibility. There are two motives of credibility, miracles and prophecies. These are things that God gives us to help us believe. You don't need them to believe, you can have the faith, but it's an aid to believe, so that you can be really reassured and fortified in believing. You're given these little helps, which are prophecies and miracles, because clearly they can come through God, because God is in charge of nature, and nobody can know the future. So because of that, it makes no sense if there are no witnesses. You wouldn't give God wouldn't give a prophecy and then let nobody hear about it, because then it would come true, and nobody would realise that it had ever been prophesied in the first place. What would be the point of that? The whole point of a prophecy is people have to know about it, and then when it does come true, they can say, oh, well, there we go, it was a genuine prophecy. And a miracle is the same thing. Miracles need witnesses, or there is no point in it being a miracle. Because a miracle is a living proof of the true religion. And there are loads of miracles. I mean, there aren't that many if you consider the whole world and 2,000 years worth of time and the time and the space. There aren't that many, but there are enough, and they are diverse enough. And the ones that we do know about are absolutely cast iron. The case of I mentioned some of them. The case of was it a little girl who visited Padre Pio and she didn't have any pupils in her eyes? Is that right? And she could see. Now there's no way, if you don't have any pupils, you can't see, but she could see. So there's no, and every single person who met her and saw that she could see would then have witnessed that miracle. There's another case in France, I think, during the Revolution, a priest buried the host in the ground because he was fleeing for his life, and it was in a field of corn, or a field of some sort of agricultural field, and it grew up and it has a sort of thing. To this day, you can get these beans. I've seen them, and they have a thing that in the actual seed itself, in the plant, in the bean that comes off it, it has a little thing that looks like a host with an IHS in it, and they grow that way to this day. And ever since 1790 something, it's a real live miracle you can still see to this day. If you visit, now where is it in Italy? St. Januarius, is it Milan? They hold up the blood of St. Januarius
Naples.
on his feast day.
In Naples.
In Naples, that's it, yeah. And it liquefies, but they don't. What would be the point in it liquefying if they just kept it in the tabernacle and nobody saw it? It has to have witnesses. So the bishop holds up the thing and he turns it over and over, and people can see this liquid blood inside it, in front of a packed cathedral, and everybody goes there to witness it. And then it turns back again, and everybody can see. Everyone can see that it's this kind of brown crust, old blood, and then it becomes liquid, and then it turns back again, and then they put it away. The whole point is that there are witnesses. Now here, the story is, I found a host lying on the floor, and the priest found a host lying on the floor. He put it in water, and then he went away. And then when he came back a bit later, there was no host, but there was heart muscle or blood or something. Now it miraculously must have transformed. Nobody actually witnessed the transformation. No one witnessed it happening. If you're going to have a miraculous transformation, surely it makes more sense for that to happen in front of people, such as the miracle at is it Lanciano? It actually happened in the Mass. The transformation happened at the consecration. The host bled, and the priest witnessed it, and the people at Mass witnessed it. It happened right then and there. Here we have something that happened behind a locked door, and even the priest who discovered the host didn't actually witness it. So there are no witnesses. That's the first problem. That doesn't make sense. Why would God do that? And because you have no witnesses, it leaves it open to all sorts of accusations, but not by us, by the militant secular society and the whoever else, of, well, you just switched the thing around behind locked doors when no one was looking. So why would God do a miracle that was not cast iron in that way, that looks like it might be fraudulent? The second thing, provenance. Where does it come from? The men that gave us these miracles don't even believe in miracles. And they didn't believe in miracles before this happened, and they didn't believe in miracles after this happened, but they believed in miracles for the purpose of that one miracle. They don't even believe in the miracles worked by our Lord. They've got clever explanations for, Lazarus wasn't really dead, he was just kind of in a coma, and then he woke up again. And the crossing of the Red Sea, well, it wasn't really a sea, it was just sort of a marsh. And, the wind kind of blew a bit on one side and made it a bit dry, and they got across. They don't believe in miracles. But they believe in this miracle. Again, there's a contradiction there. So you have no credibility. If you're going to discredit miracles, you can't then turn around and tell people, but this miracle is real. So why should we believe you if you don't believe in ones that we know are real? And it's people like Pope Francis, it's Monsignor Bergoglio who approved of the Novus Ordo miracle in Buenos Aires. The new miracle in Poland, in Legnica, the bishop, Zbigniew, what's his name, Kienkowski, he's a modern. I mean, I don't know a great deal about him. I know he was part of the neo-catechumenal way. I know he was ordained in 1971, and he taught at the Angelicum and at this pontifical university and that pontifical university. And again, these are the kind of places, now they were great institutions in the past. If you go there these days, you get taught that angels don't really exist, they're just a biblical metaphor, and they teach historico-critical analysis of Scripture is what they could. Basically, they teach you that Scripture was written by about 10 different people and not one person, and they don't believe. So these men who don't believe are giving us these miracles. That's a problem. Number 3, proof and testing. If a miracle happens, it should come from a credible source, it should have witnesses, it has to stand up to proof and testing, and it has to be given testing. You have to test something in order to prove it. And like the miracle itself, the testing has to have witnesses. You can't test something in private, because otherwise everybody else can turn around and say, well, how do I know that you tested it? So at Lourdes, when somebody is miraculously cured, they go in front of a panel of lots of different doctors, and lots of them aren't even Catholics. They just happen to be the expert in, ophthalmology or oncology or whatever it happens to be. Some of them are Catholics, not all of them are. And then it goes in front of the press and all this kind of thing. But the point is, you have to be as open and transparent about it, because otherwise everybody just has to accept your word for it that the testing was even done. Now, in the case of the Buenos Aires miracle, it happened behind closed doors, so no one witnessed it. So all we have got to go on is the scientific test. And the scientific test was done in Los Angeles. Now, why on earth, I haven't been able to come up with a credible answer to this. Why, if a miracle happens in Buenos Aires, would you send it to get tested in Los Angeles?
Hollywood.
Hollywood, yeah. Are there really no laboratories in the whole of South America, or even in the whole of Argentina, that could have done this? It's slightly suspicious, to put it mildly. The other thing is, he called in all these other scientists, one chap from Australia and an Italian and another chap from America. I don't know this, and it is very difficult. I mean, I don't want to spend my entire life looking up on the internet all about different individual personalities. I suspect, maybe somebody out there can do the research for us, I suspect you would find, if you looked hard enough, that there's one thing that all these different professors and scientists have in common. Spread out across the world as they are, what one thing might they have in common, if you're a cynic?
Masonhood.
Sorry?
Masonhood.
I don't think they're Masons, no. Well, I mean, two of them we know are Novus Ordo Catholics. I think you probably would find they are all very committed, zealous Novus Ordo Catholics, and probably all, at one time or another are involved in some sort of Novus Ordo, EWTN kind of, very zealously Novus Ordo kind of people. I don't know that that's a fact. I may be wrong about that. I know that certainly seems to be the case with Dr. Castagnon, who the host was given to, and he took it off to America for testing. And I know that that's the case with Dr. Jugibe, who was the one who came up with the, it's heart muscle and it has white blood cells and so on. They've been on EWTN and they do all these, I think, Fox TV programs where they test miracles and say, oh yes, it's true, and some of the miracles that they've found to be true are really bogus, like this woman who does the automatic writing. What's her name now? I'm getting a little bit off topic, but the Catalina Rivas, and she supposedly gives prophecies from God, but she's written entire bookshelves full of stuff. It's a bit like Medjugorje. Get these prophecies from God that just go on and on and on and on and on. And guess what? They seem to be virtually word for word the same as some book published by some guy 10 years earlier who then sues her in court for plagiarism. And it's ridiculous. And she supposedly has the stigmata and so on. Anyway, so the testing is highly dubious. There's a million questions that need answering there, and the proof, it can't be seen. Father Cardoso was in Buenos Aires one time, and he had a bit of free time, so he had to wander over to the cathedral, and he said to them, not the cathedral, the church where it took place, and he said, can I see the host? And they said no. They didn't know he was a resistance priest. He was just an Argentinian priest, dressed like a priest. So as far as they knew, he was just another priest, an old priest. They said, no, you can't see it. Well, why not? If this is a real miracle, why can you not see it? It doesn't make any sense, really. It just doesn't make any sense. When you have various saints whose bodies are incorrupt, you can go and see the incorrupt body of the saint. Right? It's not something that you hide away from people. If a miracle is a real motive of credibility, then you want people to believe, and God wants people to believe, so you want to expose as many people to it as possible. And Catholics should be trying to spread awareness of this miracle and tell people, did you know about this case at Lourdes? have you heard about Naples, St. Januarius? This is completely the wrong way around, trying to hide it from people. Anyway, the fruits. I've already discussed the fruits as regard Bishop Williamson. Don't take my word for it. Have a good old thorough read if you really have the patience and the stamina. Have a read through of those 3 liaison comments for yourself and see for yourself. That's where it leads him. It leads him to an acceptance of the Novus Ordo. If you don't accept the Novus Ordo, you're a Pharisee, you're rigid, you're sectarian. If you don't accept the Novus Ordo. That's the fruit of these so-called miracles. In Buenos Aires itself, again I have some photos in here, the priest who actually the miracle happened for, the priest who was the one who picked up the host off the floor and put it in water, the priest who had said that Mass, and who then discovered later on that it had supposedly turned into blood, that priest today is still saying Mass sitting on the floor with children sat around him in a semicircle. He's still doing tango Masses and interpretive dance Masses. And so what are the fruits? The fruits of a Eucharistic miracle should be, surely, respect for the Blessed Sacrament, respect for the Mass, for the liturgy, and so on. It should be, I would believe it, or I would be more inclined to believe it, if the news was that in that one parish in Buenos Aires they now have perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, and there's always loads of people in front of the Blessed Sacrament, adoring the Blessed Sacrament 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That would tend to lend credibility to it, wouldn't it? Because suddenly you've got this great devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. That would be a good fruit. What about conversions? Is there a single conversion that has taken place of a Novus Ordo Catholic who received communion in the hand and then said to themselves, you know what, this is wrong, I shouldn't be receiving? Communion in the hand has not come to an end in Buenos Aires. In fact, it's more prevalent than ever. This is Bergoglio's old diocese, Pope Francis's diocese when he was Monsignor Bergoglio, Cardinal Bergoglio. And again, I've got photos in there of him giving communion in the hand to people long after this miracle took place. So the fruits are all bad or non-existent. And the other thing I said in there, and it's a rhetorical point, but it's worth thinking about, if such a thing had happened at a traditional Mass, would Pope Francis have approved of it? Can you imagine Pope Francis approving of a Eucharistic miracle that took place at the traditional Mass? I can't imagine that happening for 1 minute. So, the fruits aren't there, and if there are any fruits at all, they're bad. And there is definitely a softening going on in traditional Catholic circles. There is a softening within the resistance. There is a softening towards the Novus Ordo Mass. This is happening. It's happening. It may not be obvious now. In a few years' time, as time goes on, it will become more obvious. By the time it's really obvious, it will be too late. And it won't just be confined to the resistance. I suspect it will spread like a contagion, because people in the SSPX, if the resistance are accepting the Novus Ordo miracles, and if the resistance are saying, do you know what, the Novus Ordo Mass isn't all that bad, it's not as good, but it's not all that bad, the SSPX are not going to have a very strong immune system. They're not going to. They are going to follow along in its wake. It will spread to the SSPX, which means it will spread to the indult community if they don't already think like that, and possibly even the Sedevacantists, who knows.
You have it in there, I think.
Yeah.
You already have on the website, of course, the miracle.
They do. They had a thing in there.
Bishop Williamson in
Yes,
the
and
SSPX website.
that's right. And we have a. They had an article on sspx.org about the new miracle in Poland. Yes, and I have a comparison of what they said and what Bishop Williamson says. They are actually more traditional than Bishop Williamson. The SSPX currently is not as far left. I hate using expressions like left and right, but Bishop Williamson is to the left of the SSPX by quite a long way when it comes to this. They are more cautious about accepting it, and they are more critical of the Novus Ordo Mass than Bishop Williamson is, so far. But it won't stay that way for long. It wouldn't have stayed that way for long anyway because of their doctrinal declaration and because they've made their peace with the Conciliar Church. But now that Bishop Williamson is pushing this, it's going to go downhill even faster. Now the purpose of a miracle, it's linked to the idea of the fruits. Why does God do a miracle? It's a motive of credibility, but what does he want? I mean, a particular type of miracle is done to emphasize a particular thing. God knows, in the mind of God, there is a reason why a miracle is done. And, I mean, just to take a very obvious example, in the case of Lourdes, the miracles that are done there are to teach us, number one, Lourdes is real. Number two, therefore, the message of Lourdes is real. What did Our Lady of Lourdes say? She said, I am the Immaculate Conception. So it reinforces belief in the Immaculate Conception and also encourages devotion to Our Lady and all the other things, prayer and penance and saying the Rosary and so forth. And as a matter of recorded historical fact, we know that did in fact take place. That was clearly the purpose, and that was clearly what took place as a result. People went to Lourdes and they believed, and that there is, and it's the same with Fatima. The miracle of the sun, 70,000 people witnessed it. Notice it has a lot of witnesses, and Our Lady said in advance, I'm going to work this miracle, tell everybody to come and see it. So there's a lot of witnesses there, and everybody turned up, including the editor of the newspaper and all these bad guys, Freemasons and so on, came to mock it and to laugh at it, and then went away Catholics. They were converted by it, and those are the fruits. And again, clearly there was a purpose, and it's not just individual conversions, but it's also the message of Fatima and so on and so on. And that purpose was fulfilled. What would be the purpose of the Buenos Aires miracle? What would be the purpose of the Legnica miracle? Surely, again, it would be, this Mass is valid, I am really present, stop doing this to me. This Mass insults me, giving communion in the hand is an offence, you are blaspheming against me, you're abusing my presence in the Blessed Sacrament. Was that purpose fulfilled? Clearly not. So, and what are the fruits? The fruits are not an end of communion in the hand, they're not Corpus Christi processions and all-night adoration and all this kind of thing. It speaks for itself. And then the similarities, I've mentioned this again, it's the same miracle happening again and again and again. It happens 3 times in this one church in Buenos Aires. That in itself is extremely fishy. What are the odds? One church in one city, in one country, in one part of the world. A little church in Buenos Aires, and in 1992, 1994 and 1996, the same miracle happens 3 times in a row. And the first one takes place in May 1992, which just happens to be the very month when Monsignor Bergoglio was appointed as Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, May 1992. But it doesn't really gain any ground, so the same miracle essentially happens again in 1994, doesn't really go any further afield, doesn't gain any publicity. 1996, this one really takes off, and that's a success story, and then now we have other ones happening all over the place. 2 of them in Poland within the space of 8 years. It just doesn't sound probable at all. Now, the conclusion, when talking about these Novus Ordo miracles, I think we can say more or less the same thing as regards Bishop Williamson. What is the purpose? So Bishop Williamson promoting the Novus Ordo Mass, I will simply say what I said about the Novus Ordo miracles. It begins in modernism and it ends in modernism, even if not every single point along the way it's, properly speaking, modernist. It begins with modernism and it ends with modernism. That surely should tell us all we need to know. It, I think, is a measure of how very, very serious the situation is that we now have a significant number of traditional Catholics, including priests, who are prepared to accept this. And I also find it extremely worrying that nobody has sat down and said, let's look a little deeper into this. Let's play devil's advocate and ask ourselves, why was the laboratory in Los Angeles and not in Buenos Aires? Why was it that this happened 3 times in a row at the same church within 6 years. Nobody is asking these questions. Why not? And I think, well, there may be different answers to this, but I think in large part it's a symptom of a much deeper problem, which is, well, I mean, it's partly what Father Pfeiffer was talking about earlier on. It's the person and not the thing. And it's Bishop Williamson who says it, therefore it's true. So we're looking at who's saying it and not what's actually being said. And I think it's beyond serious dispute. If Bishop Fellay had said anything approaching this, nobody would have accepted it within the resistance. Because Bishop Williamson says it gains acceptance. And it's a dangerous thing. That is the real problem. The real problem, accepting the Novus Ordo Mass is a pretty big problem, right? But beyond that, what's a very, very big problem is that we have a large number of people prepared to accept whatever Bishop Williamson tells them, because he's Bishop Williamson. That's a very, very, very dangerous situation indeed. That's the same situation we were in before 2012. Bishop Fellay, how can it not be? He's a saint. Look at his big smile. Of course he's a saint. He's Bishop Fellay. How can you criticise him? And we said at the time, it's not because he's Bishop Fellay. It's because of what he says. It's not that we have a personal grudge against Bishop Fellay. He's surely the nicest man in the world. Unfortunately, what he says is wrong. And we have to say the same thing now about Bishop Williamson. It should be a wake-up call, because if we can establish beyond any reasonable doubt that what Bishop Williamson is saying is wrong, and that nevertheless people are accepting it, and that the people who cry wolf are being attacked for blowing the whistle, then the next question should be, is there anything else where this is happening? Or will happen? What else is he saying that perhaps is gaining acceptance when it shouldn't do? And again, I would suggest, number one, no structure, no organisation. It sounds like something that's, some kind of abstract, silly dispute. It's not. It's the very, very heart of the church. If you have no structure and no organisation, clearly that means you have no seminary, because you can't have a seminary without a structure. You can't. Well, I knew a man who was a teacher. He died a couple of years ago, God rest his soul. But he taught in a school in Milton Keynes in the early 70s in England. That was the first prototype liberal school in the era of hippies and all of that nonsense. It was, and they had a timetable where there were no bells, there was no timetable, there were no classes, and there were no school rules. And the kids kind of went from lesson to lesson whenever they felt like it, and did the work or didn't do the work, or listened to the teacher or didn't listen to the teacher as they felt like it. It was I can't imagine what that must have been like. It must have been absolute anarchy, and I don't think the experiment lasted very long. You can't run any organisation that way, we're human beings by our nature are designed to live in societies which have structures. Aristotle says that, and it's just, we don't need Aristotle to tell us that. It's just common sense. You can't have a country without having rules. Because even if just out of force of necessity, this is the problem with, you see, if you have somebody who says, I'm an anarchist or I'm a libertarian, I'm not quite sure what the difference is. We shouldn't have any governments or any laws whatsoever. Okay, very well, fine. When you get in your car and drive down the road, which side of the road are you going to drive on? Now you may say, well, we're all going to drive on the right-hand side just out of convention. But it is kind of a law of necessity. You've got to do that, and it is a structure. It is something that you are adhering to, even if it's not necessarily the reason you're doing it is not because you're going to be thrown in prison, but because you actually don't want to have a crash. You're imposing it on yourself. You've got to have some sort of structure. And it's true with the church as well. And I can't even believe that anybody should need that proving to them. The problem with Bishop Williamson saying no structure and no organisation and saying I have no authority is that it's not as simple as that. As usual, there's a twist, and there's a huge amount of hypocrisy in that, and I don't say that lightly. It's, well, all right, let's be generous. Maybe it's not hypocrisy. Maybe it's just massive inconsistency, because of course he does have an authority, and he does use that authority, and he does use that for a sort of unofficial structure in order to destroy any real structure. Because if he really believed in anarchy and no structure and no authority, then we wouldn't be in quite the mess we're in now. But because he can organise Father Zendeas to go here and Father Abraham to go there, it's really damaging to the resistance. And because he can have the authority of, he's Bishop Williamson, you have to go along with what he says because he's a bishop. That's why people, that's how he can influence people into, for example, accepting Novus Ordo miracles. If they're going to accept it, it's only because it's Bishop Williamson. You can know for certain, if I had written to people in the Recusant saying, you've got to all accept that these Novus Ordo miracles are real, otherwise you're a Pharisee, I don't think that many people would have been convinced by it, because he's a bishop and because we have in our minds this idea that there's an episcopal authority attached to it. So saying I have no authority, it means I have no authority when it suits me, and I do secretly when that suits me. And of course, finally, authority is not something which is the toy, the plaything, it's not a bonus, it's not the whim of the person above, it's not a benefit for them, it's not a perk that they have, it's which is merciful to the little man underneath. Authority, just like obedience, it protects the person underneath it. Obedience is a good thing, authority is a good thing. You want to be the one being given orders, you don't want to be the one giving orders. Because being given orders is the more comfortable thing. Giving the orders is the much more stressful thing, because if things go wrong, it's your fault. You are the one that has to really stop and think and stress about the worrying decisions. And so if you say I have no authority, don't ask me, it's really uncharitable and wicked, and it is an act of mercy, it is an act of charity to use authority for the good of souls. It's not, the equivalent would be a father of a family, saying to his children, go off and do whatever you like, I don't care, just leave me alone, leave me in peace. And the wife comes to him and says, you've got to do something about this, they're all taking drugs and they're, I don't have any authority. It's not kind, it's not nice. And it's an abuse, because you're not made a bishop just so that you can have fun, so that you can wear nice vestments and eat at the top table. You're given that as a real duty, as something that you have to use, and it should really make you very, very, very scared about using it the right way. When St. Pius X became a bishop, his mother congratulated him and he told her off. And he said, don't congratulate me, because if I do something wrong, I lose my soul. It's true of a priest in a way. A priest has a responsibility. If he goes bad, then he takes a lot of souls to hell with him, while a bishop even more so. And the Pope times a million, but a bishop to a great extent. So yeah, there are other things I could say. I've got my eye on the time. Yeah. Okay. Do we have a bit of time for questions, or?
A couple minutes.
If there are, yeah.
Okay, so what is the real desire of these statements? What's the outcome? Why is he saying it? What's the speculation on that?
I answered that at the start. That's what everyone wants to know. Why? The honest answer is I don't know. I don't know.
Somebody paying him?
Well,
Well, I'm not saying that to be funny, it's just...
No, the way
He
you...
got a call
yeah.
in the beginning, didn't he?
The way you
Did he get a
approach...
phone call talking about his security? And he told you, I
He did.
will have to let you know how that goes?
We never talked about it again, just that day.
Look, two things. We have to, first of all, if we're going to speculate about it, it's not wrong to speculate about it if you're justified, if you have a good reason, and I think we have a pretty good reason. But you have to bear in mind that this is always speculation, right? We don't actually know, and we probably never will, but you can look at it you can sort of get a bit closer to it by starting at the other end and saying, what is the effect of this, who benefits from it, where is this going? The answer is, it's pretty clear. If this were not going on, if Bishop Williamson were not preaching anarchy, if he were supporting organisation and structure, if he were using all the force of his personality and episcopal authority to, instead of break down the relations between different priests and different groups and break them apart, if instead of that he were doing the opposite and using it to bring people together, to coalesce them, to unite them in the faith, to build up seminaries, if he were, instead of telling every young man who approaches him, don't go to the seminary, there can't be seminaries anymore and you can't be a priest, go into a corner and wait for the end of the world, which he is doing at the moment. If he was saying, yes, you need to go to the seminary, if he was saying, from 2012 onwards, all the priests have to come out of the SSPX and we're going to start with a new, SSPX MC and all this kind of thing, think how different things could be. Think how very, very different. The resistance would be we would have stormed the barricades by now, the SSPX would be gone. It would be a shadow of its former self. And with the resistance we'd be on a roll by now. We really would. So, and the other thing is, if I were the enemy, and I've put all this time into infiltrating the church, and I've managed to achieve Vatican II, and then the SSPX breaks away, and now I've nobbled the SSPX, the enemy aren't stupid, they know what's going to happen. What's going to happen? You're going to get a breakaway SSPX. You're going to get a resistance there, and so what do? You organise to infiltrate and nobble the resistance from day one. So you nobble the SSPX, and you sweep up the resistance at the same time, and you've got both of them. And then people are either in one camp or the other, but you're really controlling both of them from behind the scenes. I don't know for a fact that that's what's going on. That's what my common sense suggests to me. But
Who was that phone call from?
Well, Bishop Williamson. But that was
From
just
Bishop Williamson. Who did you get the phone call from? From Bishop Flay?
No. Bishop Tissier.
Bishop Tissier. So what the phone call about his future security was from the SSPX, pretty much.
Yeah, we'll just
If you'll just be quiet, we could take care of it. Is that what it was?
No, it was just that he had to see what the deal was. That's all. Then he talked to me about it afterwards. He said more or less the same thing. So,
I mean, with Bishop Williamson, if they were going to make an offer to him, or come to some sort of an arrangement with him, or offer him something, or accept something from him, and a deal or an arrangement or an agreement is two-sided, isn't it? It has to be. It can't be unilateral. What is the one thing that Bishop Williamson has to offer the SSPX? Because at that stage he had no house, he had no chapels, no network of priests, nothing. He had nothing to offer them. The one thing that he would have had to offer them is his future involvement, his attitude, what would they want from him that he has to offer them?
His following.
Yeah, exactly. His following and what he's going to do with the resistance in the future. That's the only thing that would really interest them. Surely. I mean, I may be wrong, but that's all I can think of.
Well, it could be maybe a punishment from God, since like the Pope won't wear the
Tiara.
anymore. Now he just wears the bishop's mitre, right? He's giving away his authority when we look to him for it. So if he doesn't give it to us like a father, then he's being disobedient.
Yeah.
So if Bishop Williamson was saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it, don't look to me, maybe it's more like a punishment, possibly, from
Well-
God, that he's doing the wrong thing now and he's like falling into sin.
Like Nebuchadnezzar eating the
So
grass.
he's sort of making
Well,
the wrong
maybe.
choices out of punishment.
Maybe, but the thing about that is, who's really getting punished here? We are. We're the ones who
We're
are
all being
suffering.
punished.
Yeah.
The world's in this state because of sin.
Yeah.
When
and
the
it
war
might.
happens, we're all going to suffer.
Yeah.
Because of the sinners.
Yes.
We all are, but
Yes. And it's no doubt in the mind of God there is some kind of divine plan going on here, and the wheat and the chaff are being separated, and no doubt in 50 years' time or 100 years' time or whenever, when people look back on this, it will be really clear what was happening. And they will say, future generations will say, of the people who made the wrong choice, how could they do that? We can't see now what's coming in the future. All we can see is what's immediately in front of us, the immediate choice we face, which is accept the Novus Ordo Mass in order to stay friends with Bishop Williamson, or don't accept the Novus Ordo Mass and then you're no longer friends with Bishop Williamson. Father Chazal
I think what we can do is,
said that in a
after
conference
the
once.
dinner and all that, we'll go close.
Okay.
We'll have, our next meeting, we're gonna have, actually just have it down at the house, because we'll actually have a little discussion kind of, and, we'll do it down at the Priory.
Okay.
It's also a little bit cooler down there, temperature's better. But, we'll have it down there after 7 o'clock. And then they'll get the campfire thing going afterwards.
Yeah.
But we can continue the discussion, because this, multiple things. But it's time now, we can just say the prayer and then.
What's the next item on the agenda?
Yes.
Well, one last thing, so I mean, you can see a trajectory. If it's all pointing that way, like, accept the new mass, because we're making a deal
Yeah.
with the conciliar church, and it points that way. Isn't that the
Yeah.
obvious
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Oh yeah, you can clearly see, yeah.
You got that.
We don't know why, and nobody.
Obviously, he would be working with them, because he's saying the same thing, if that's what's coming up. And
Well,
they're supposed to know this
But
weekend.
remember, the people have, when you have liberal ideas, you can say the liberal thing either because you're being paid to say it,
Or
Or
because
because
you
you just
genuinely
believe it.
are a liberal, yeah.
if you don't have to be paid to say it, see what I
But
mean?
the other thing is, like I said at the start, you don't really need to know why he's doing it. What you need to know is that he is doing it.
Right. Let's go ahead and say that, then we'll go downstairs.
In the name of the Father, and in the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Saint Joseph, Saint William, Saint Teresa,